The hall was so silent you could hear a pin drop. 25 of us sat cross-legged with thin cushions doing little to soften the hard floor. We were bound together by a vow of silence. 10 hours of meditation for 10 days. That was the deal we all made, with the understanding that we would find peace of body, mind and soul at the end of it. When the silence finally lifted, our voices felt strange, and yet we spoke to each other like instant friends, united in this weird intensity of living with each other in silence for over a week. Some were seasoned retreat goers, returning each year for a mental tune-up. For me, it was my first attempt to quiet the chatter of my mind. During the breaks, I often glanced at a woman who radiated this calm. Her gentle smile never faded, and I longed to touch that serenity by the final day, but I didn't. What I've since discovered is that while mindfulness is a great thing, achieving it through meditation isn't suited to everyone. Moreover, it can be extremely harmful when weaponised by cults and high control groups. Hi, I'm Renee, and I've started this channel to use it as a platform to discuss cult topics and to offer some simple art therapy activities that can support recovery from high control environments. Today, I want to discuss mindfulness. This is a huge topic, so I'm going to be keeping to a lot of the basics in terms of the good, the bad, and the interesting. We'll start with a bit of history, where it's set in contemporary mental health practice, and all the reported benefits it can have. We'll then peek into the dark side of mindfulness practices, in which I'll share some of my personal experiences and consider how something so good can become so bad in culty situations. And then we'll finish off with how it fits into art therapy practice. This video contains discussion of coercive control, which may be distressing for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. At the simplest level, mindfulness is a quality of awareness. It's all about paying attention to the present moment with openness and without judgment. This could be in relation to internal or external stimuli, or a combination of both. You could be mindful while washing the dishes, while walking the dog, eating lunch, or even just having a conversation. It is as much a state of mind as it is a practice that can be achieved. So in terms of a brief history of mindfulness, it was cultivated primarily in Buddhist traditions, where practices of present moment awareness were practiced through either seated or walking exercises. Related traditions such as Hindu yoga and Chinese practices like Tai Chi also emphasise mindful awareness through movement. At its core, all forms of mindfulness invite people to live more fully, to show up in their own lives with presence, curiosity and kindness. From its inception hundreds of years ago, developing a state of mindfulness has long been valued. And in the 1950s and 60s, it began moving into mainstream Western culture, where it's been embraced both by the wellness community who advocate for alternative forms of healing and researchers in psychology and neuroscience. It's now a key component of some evidence-based therapies such as dialectical behaviour therapy, known as DBT, and mindful-based stress reduction. To put it simply, mindfulness today can be seen as moving across three main spheres. First, there are the traditional spiritual roots, which are still going, and that is the practices drawn from Buddhism, Hindu, and Taoist traditions. Then there's the clinical and therapeutic sphere, where mindfulness has been adapted into evidence-based programs like the ones I mentioned earlier, and a little bit more broadly into general mental health support. And sitting somewhere in between the two are holistic and wellness approaches, which often blend elements of both. Sometimes these also weave in New Age concepts like energy work, chakras, and crystals. Not surprisingly, with such an expansive history, there are many ways in which mindfulness can be practiced. Broadly speaking, its original form in Buddhism involved meditation alongside the study of ethics, community focus, and devotional practices. Meditation is basically just one part of an entire pathway to enlightenment. On the screen are descriptions of some of its more traditional roots and practices, as well as some modern adaptations. And as you can see, mindfulness can take lots of different forms and shapes. It might be sitting meditation, moving through yoga or Tai Chi, following a program like DBT, getting creative with mindful art, or simply paying attention to breath work. At its core, mindfulness is about gentle, non-judgmental awareness to the present moment in whatever form that takes. In religious and in secular settings, mindfulness is praised as being beneficial for a whole range of things, especially those relating to emotional regulation and developing resilience and overall well-being. It's also been the topic of a lot of academic studies, with some universities even setting up whole departments dedicated to researching mindfulness. This review paper summarises its positive traits with higher levels of life satisfaction, agreeableness, conscientiousness, vitality, self-esteem, empathy, sense of autonomy, competence, optimism, and contributing to an all-round pleasant effect. These examples show how mindfulness can weave into everyday life in a variety of ways besides just meditation or breathing exercises. For some people, myself included, the most effective way to practice mindfulness is through creativity. In art therapy, it can be applied in such a way that it combines the grounding effects of mindful awareness with the freedom of creative expression. There are a few ways that this can be done, but one of my personal favourites is Zentangling, a mindful drawing practice that uses simple, repetitive patterns to bring focus and calm. The name comes from Zen Buddhism because it involves repeating patterns slowly and deliberately, paying full attention to shapes, lines, and pen flow. This focused, non-judgmental awareness is mindfulness in action. While it's technically a creative practice rather than a formal meditation, it often produces the same calm, focused state that psychologists call flow. This week's art therapy prompt is exploring mindfulness through Zentangling. Before we get started, a quick reminder of our self-guided art therapy guidelines. Create a safe space with no distractions. Focus on the process, not the product. Keep it private unless it's safe to share. Reflect in writing or to a therapist. And respect your own boundaries. If you need more details about these guidelines, please check out my first video. The only equipment you need for Zentangling is paper and a pen. Ideally a black fine liner, though really anything will do. I'm using my small sketchbook for this one, as the paper works well with the felt tip marker I've chosen. To begin, simply draw the outline of a shape. There's no need for a ruler or perfect lines. Imperfections are part of the charm. This line becomes the net. From here, divide the shape into smaller sections in any way you like. Next, fill each section with different patterns. If you want some ideas, you can easily search online for Zentangle patterns for inspiration. What I love about this process is that the results almost always look intriguing, even if done with someone who has no art training at all. The Zentangle method was developed in the early 2000s by Rick Roberts, a former monk who practiced Zen Buddhism, and Maria Thomas, who was a calligrapher. Their aim was to combine structured, repetitive patterns with a meditative quality of drawing, making it accessible to anyone, regardless of skill. The way I understand the story is that one day Marie was busy in her study working on a calligraphy piece when Rick came in from having just done some meditation. And when he came in, he called out to Maria and said, "Hey, Maria." And she was so enthralled with what she was doing, she did not even realise that he was there. So between the two of them, they came up with the philosophical basis of doing structured creativity was very much like Zen Buddhism. And over time, it's been embraced in art therapy for supporting relaxation, focus, and emotional expression without the pressure of producing good art. And while art therapy isn't primarily about aesthetics, having it look funky and cool at the end can deliver a little dopamine boost. Because it's so simple, I often use Zentangling as an introduction to art therapy. It shows that you don't need any special skills to benefit from creativity. So before moving on to the reflection, here's a little story from Granny Garnet about mindfulness and meditation.
My dears, gather close and I'll tell you a tale from my own life. This morning I wandered into the forest at dawn, the mist curling around the trees like dragon's breath. I carried nothing but my small cushion and an old shawl, determined to sit in silence, just as the monks of distant lands I had read about once did. I found a clearing where sunlight spilled through the branches and placed my cushion on the moss, folding my legs beneath me. The forest was alive with sound, the magpie singing, cicadas droning, the creek gurgling nearby. At first, my mind leapt at every noise. Too noisy for peace, I thought. But then I remembered a teaching I once heard. The sound is not a disturbance. The sound is practice. So I breathed in, out, in, out. Slowly the forest stopped feeling like a distraction and became part of my meditation. The magpies became my teachers, the breeze my companion, the sunlight my blessing. When I finally opened my eyes, the mist had lifted, and so had my worries. I smiled, realizing I hadn't escaped the world at all. I'd simply learned to sit within it.
At the start of this video, I shared my experience of attending a silent meditation retreat known as Vipassana. For many, this kind of intensive practice is deeply fulfilling and transformative. I discovered that I'm not one of those people. I've always struggled with meditation and I assumed I must be just doing it wrong. I thought that if I dedicated myself fully, 10 hours a day for 10 days, I would finally learn how to quiet my mind. But that didn't happen. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't switch off my thoughts. The constant rumination persisted, and being told that this was due to impurities in my spiritual body felt more unsettling than comforting. At times I grew frustrated, wishing I was back home, actively working on my challenges rather than sitting there with them. The retreat, instead of being refreshing, often felt suffocating. What I did value, however, were the friendships that grew out of the experience. On the final day, when we were finally able to speak, I was struck by how strong a bond had formed through silence and shared struggle. I don't know whether it's trauma, ADHD traits, or simply how my mind works, but sitting still doesn't quieten my thoughts. Zentangling does. The repetitive patterns give me a way to interrupt rumination, leaving me more refreshed and present. After a session, I noticed details I might otherwise overlook. The sound of birds in my yard, the vivid colours of flowers, signs that my mind has shifted from endless loops to genuine awareness. And that is the heart of mindfulness. It doesn't have to look one way. Whether it's through meditation, creative expression like Zentangling, or simply pausing to notice the world around, mindfulness can support emotional balance, deepen resilience, and enhance everyday joy. At its best, it opens the door to living more fully in the moment, whatever that moment may hold. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. I'd love to hear other people's experiences of mindfulness. What does and does not work for you? If you feel comfortable, let me know in the comments. And I hope you'll join me next time when I explore what can happen when cults and high control groups hijack mindfulness and use it as a tool of manipulation. The activities and opinions expressed in this video are for educational purposes only. They are not a substitute for professional therapy. If any of the topics covered stirred up strong emotions, please practice self-care and seek professional guidance as necessary.